Gunslinger agreed to protect a widow. Until he learned she put the bounty on his head, he thought he was saving a widow from killers, but she'd already put a price on his head that would make angels weep. The dust never settled in Perdition Springs. It hung in the air like the ghosts of better men, swirling around Cole McKenna's boots as he guided his horse down the town's only street. The sun beat down merciless and white, turning the wooden buildings into furnaces and the ground into cracked leather. Cole pulled his hat lower, casting shadows across a face that had seen too many towns just like this one. He'd come to Perdition Springs because a man could disappear here. The kind of place where questions weren't asked and names weren't checked against wanted posters. Where a gunslinger could drink his whiskey in peace and pretend the ghost didn't follow him into his dreams. But peace was a luxury Cole McKenna had never been able to afford. She appeared from the shadows between the mercantile and the saloon like smoke given form. Eleanor Harwick moved with the careful grace of a woman who had learned to make herself small in a world that devoured the weak. Her black dress hung loose on her thin frame, and her dark hair was pulled back severe and tight, as if she were trying to contain something wild that threatened to break free. Mr. McKenna. Her voice carried the weight of desert wind and distant thunder. I need to speak with you. Cole's hand drifted toward his gun, more habit than threat. In his line of work, strangers who knew your name were usually carrying bullets with your initials carved into the lead. You've got me at a disadvantage, ma'am. Can't say I recall making your acquaintance. Eleanor stepped closer, and Cole could see the desperation swimming in her dark eyes like fish in a poisoned well. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small leather pouch to her chest. My name is Eleanor Harwick. I own the ranch 10 miles north of town. She paused, swallowing hard. I need your help. The words hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Cole had heard those words before in a dozen different towns from 100 different mouths. They always meant trouble. They always meant blood. I'm not in the helping business, Mrs. Harwick. Please. The word cracked like a whip in the still air. Eleanor's composure shattered, and suddenly she wasn't a mysterious woman in black, but a widow drowning in grief and fear. They killed my husband, shot him down like a dog in front of our home. And now they're coming for me. Cole studied her face, reading the truth in the lines around her eyes and the way her shoulders carried the weight of sorrow. He'd seen enough widows to know real grief from performance. And Eleanor Harwick wore her pain like a brand burned deep into her soul. Who's they? The Carson brothers. Bill and Frank Carson. They want my land, and they'll kill anyone who stands in their way. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. I have money. Gold. My husband left me well provided for. She opened the leather pouch with shaking fingers, revealing a small fortune in gold coins that caught the sunlight like fallen stars. Cole had seen men die for half as much, and here this woman was offering it all to a stranger whose reputation was written in blood across 3 territories. Why me? Cole asked, though he already knew the answer. In towns like Perdition Springs, there are only 2 kinds of men, those who ran from violence and those who rode toward it. And Cole McKenna's name was whispered in the same breath as thunder and lightning. Because you're the only man alive who scares them more than they scare me. The truth of it settled between them like dust after a windstorm. Cole had built his reputation on being the devil other devils feared, and now this broken woman wanted to make a bargain with him. The irony tasted bitter as alkali water. He looked at Eleanor Harwick, really looked at her, and saw something that made his chest tighten with an emotion he'd thought long dead. Beneath the fear and desperation, there was strength, the kind of quiet steel that held homesteads together through drought and hardship, the kind of courage that faced down killers with nothing but determination and a leather pouch full of gold. My husband was a good man, Eleanor continued, her voice steady now. He never hurt anyone. He just wanted to work his land and live in peace. They took that from him. They took everything. Cole felt the familiar weight of his guns at his hips, the leather holsters worn smooth by years of quick draws and violent endings. He thought of all the men who'd hired him, all the causes he'd fought for that turned to ash in his mouth. But looking at Eleanor Harwick, he saw something different, something worth protecting. "I'll take the job," he said finally, the words falling from his lips like stones into still water. Relief flooded Eleanor's face, transforming her from a desperate widow into something approaching hope. She pressed the pouch into his hands, her fingers cold despite the desert heat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Cole pocketed the gold without counting it. In his experience, desperation paid better than greed, and Eleanor Harwick was desperate enough to give him everything she had. They rode north together as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Eleanor sat her horse well, moving with the easy grace of someone who'd been born to the saddle. She spoke little during the ride, but Cole caught her watching him from the corner of her eye, studying him like a map of unfamiliar territory. The Harwick Ranch sat in a valley between two low hills, protected from the worst of the desert winds, but exposed to anyone who might want to approach with ill intent. The house was small but well built, with thick adobe walls and narrow windows that could serve as gun ports if needed. The barn and outbuildings were in good repair, and Cole could see signs that this had once been a thriving spread. "We'll eat," Eleanor said as they dismounted, "and then we'll talk about what comes next." As she prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Cole positioned himself where he could watch the approaches to the house. The evening air carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called out its lonely song. But beneath the peaceful surface, Cole felt the familiar prickle of danger. Something wasn't right. Something about the way Eleanor moved through her own kitchen like a ghost, the way she kept glancing toward a locked drawer in what must have been her husband's desk. He'd taken the job, accepted her gold, and given his word. But as the night settled around the ranch like a shroud, Cole McKenna couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just signed his own death warrant. The candlelight flickered across Eleanor's face as she served the meal, and Cole found himself wondering what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows of her grief. She cooked his meals and mended his wounds, while hiding the wanted poster with his face on it beneath her marriage bed. The days passed like water through cupped hands, each one bleeding into the next with the slow rhythm of desert time. Cole McKenna had expected gunfire and bloodshed, the familiar dance of violence that followed him like a shadow across the territories. Instead, he found himself caught in something far more dangerous, the quiet intimacy of ordinary life. Each morning, he rose before dawn to patrol the boundaries of Eleanor's land. The horse beneath him moved with the sure-footed confidence of an animal that knew its rider's intentions, picking its way across the rocky terrain while Cole's eyes scanned the horizon for signs of trouble that never seemed to come. The Carson brothers remained as elusive as smoke, their threat hanging over the ranch like storm clouds that refused to break. Eleanor kept to her routines with the precision of a woman who had learned that structure was the only thing standing between her and madness. She tended her small garden behind the house, coaxing tomatoes and beans from soil that seemed too hard to dry to nurture anything. Her movements were careful and deliberate, as if she were performing a ritual that might keep the world from falling apart entirely. "Coffee's ready," she would call as Cole returned from his morning ride, and he would find a steaming cup waiting for him on the porch rail, black as midnight and strong enough to wake the dead. They spoke little during those first weeks, communicating more through gesture and glance than words. Eleanor would set his plate before him at mealtimes, simple fare of beans and cornbread, sometimes a piece of salt pork or a few eggs from the chickens she kept in a small coop behind the barn. Cole would nod his thanks and eat in silence, aware of her presence like warmth from a fire he couldn't see. But slowly, carefully, they began to share fragments of themselves. "My husband built this place with his own hands," Eleanor said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains purple and gold. "Every board, every nail. He said a man's home should be his own work, not something bought with another's sweat." Cole cleaned his guns as she spoke, the familiar ritual of oil and cloth keeping his hands busy while his mind wandered. "Sounds like a good man." "He was." Eleanor's voice carried the weight of memory. "Thomas never raised his voice, never lifted his hand in anger. Even when the cattle died in the drought 2 years back, even when the bank threatened to foreclose. He just worked harder, slept less, found a way. The oil gleamed on the gun barrel as Cole worked, and he found himself thinking of all the good men he'd killed over the years. Men with wives and children, men with dreams and gentle hands. Men who'd simply been standing in the wrong place when violence came calling. "What about you?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Did you always—" She let the question hang unfinished, but Cole understood. "Did you always kill for money? Did you always carry death in your holsters? Was there ever a time when your hands weren't stained with blood?" "I was 12 when I first pulled a trigger," he said, surprising himself with the honesty. "A man named Jeremiah Black killed my father over a poker game. Shot him in the back while he was walking away. I waited 3 years, learned to shoot, tracked Black down to Tombstone. Put a bullet between his eyes while he was eating breakfast." Eleanor didn't flinch at the story, didn't look away from his face. She simply nodded as if she'd expected nothing less from a man like him. "And after that, word got around. Turned out I had a talent for it. People started paying me to solve their problems, and problems always seem to require bullets." Cole reassembled his gun with practiced efficiency. Been riding that trail ever since. The night sounds settled around them. Crickets and coyotes, the distant lowing of cattle. Eleanor rose from her chair with the fluid grace that marked all her movements, but she paused at the door. "Thank you," she said softly, "for telling me. For being here. Just doing the job, ma'am." But even as he said it, Cole knew it was a lie. This wasn't just a job anymore. Somewhere in the space between shared meals and quiet conversations, something had shifted. He found himself looking forward to the sound of Eleanor's voice calling him in from his patrol, to the sight of her dark hair catching the lamplight as she moved through the house. It was a dangerous thing, this feeling growing in his chest like a tender shoot pushing up through hard ground. In his line of work, caring about someone was like painting a target on their back and signing your own death warrant. But he couldn't seem to stop himself. The trouble began 3 weeks into his stay, when Cole decided to search Eleanor's bedroom for any papers that might give him more information about the Carson brothers. He told himself it was professional necessity, just good sense to know everything about the people threatening his employer. He found the wanted poster beneath her mattress, crumpled and worn as if it had been handled many times. The face staring back at him from the yellowed paper was his own, captured in black ink and hard lines. The words beneath the drawing made his blood run cold. Wanted, dead or alive. Cole McKenna, for the murder of Thomas Harwick. Reward $2,000. The world tilted on its axis, and suddenly everything made sense. Eleanor's careful watching, the way she moved through her house like a ghost, the locked drawer in her husband's desk that she guarded like a secret. She hadn't hired him to protect her from the Carson brothers. She'd hired him so she could kill him herself. Cole sank onto the edge of the bed, the poster still clutched in his trembling hands. Thomas Harwick. The name echoed in his memory like a gunshot in a canyon. 3 months ago, in a dusty town called Millerville. A dispute over a card game that had turned deadly when Harwick called him a cheat and went for his gun. Cole had been faster, as he always was. Harwick had died in the street with his boots on and his honor intact, and Cole had ridden away without a second thought. It was just another job, another dead man in a long line of dead men. But Thomas Harwick had been Eleanor's husband, the gentle man who'd built this house with his own hands, who'd never raised his voice in anger, who'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to save his ranch. And Cole McKenna had put a bullet in his heart. The poster fluttered to the floor as Cole buried his face in his hands. Outside, he could hear Eleanor moving through the kitchen, preparing their evening meal with the same careful precision she brought to everything. The domestic sounds felt like mockery now, like salt in an open wound. How long had she known? From the very beginning, when she'd approached him in Perdition Springs with her leather pouch full of gold. Or had she discovered the truth later, piecing together the details until the horrible picture became clear? Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Eleanor Harwick had every right to see him dead, and Cole McKenna had walked right in her trap like a lamb to slaughter. The smell of cooking beans drifted through the house, and Cole heard Eleanor's voice calling out as she did every evening, "Supper's ready." But this time, her words carried a different weight entirely. As Cole folded the wanted poster and slipped it into his pocket, he wondered if tonight's meal would be his last, and whether the woman who'd been caring for him had already decided how his story would end. When dawn broke over the ranch, she was waiting at the kitchen table with her hands folded like a prayer and his death warrant spread between them. Dawn came to the valley like blood seeping through bandages, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that seemed to promise violence. Cole McKenna stood in the doorway of the cabin, his shadow stretching long across the wooden floor, the crumpled wanted poster heavy in his pocket like a stone against his heart. He'd spent the night walking the boundaries of Eleanor's land, wrestling with ghosts and memories, trying to piece together the fragments of a truth that cut deeper than any bullet ever had. Thomas Harwick. The name echoed in his mind like a prayer spoken in an empty church, meaningless and hollow. But it hadn't been meaningless to Eleanor. She sat at the kitchen table with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, still wearing the black dress she'd worn every day since he'd arrived. Her dark hair was pulled back severe and tight, and her face held the calm of someone who'd finally stopped running from the inevitable. "You found it," she said without looking up, her voice steady as stone. Cole stepped into the room, his spurs ringing soft against the floor. The wanted poster felt like fire in his pocket, burning through the fabric to brand his skin with the weight of what he'd done. "When?" The word came out rough as sandpaper. "When did you know?" Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap, the only sign that she wasn't made of marble. "From the beginning. I followed you from Millerville to Perdition Springs. Waited 3 weeks for the right moment to approach you." The truth hit Cole like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. 3 weeks of watching him, studying him, learning his habits and weaknesses. 3 weeks of planning his death while he drank whiskey in saloons and played cards with strangers. The Carson brothers? A bitter smile touched Eleanor's lips. "There are no Carson brothers. There never were. Just a story I needed you to believe long enough to bring you here." Cole felt the familiar weight of his guns at his hips, the leather holsters worn smooth by years of violence and quick draws. His hands remained still at his sides, but every instinct screamed at him to move, to fight, to run. Instead, he stood frozen in the doorway like a man facing his own execution. "Why?" The question tore from his throat like a confession. "Why not just hire someone else to kill me? Why this?" Eleanor finally looked up at him, and Cole saw tears cutting silver tracks through the dust on her cheeks. But beneath the tears, her eyes burned with something harder than grief, something that had been forged in the fires of loss and tempered by months of planning. "Because I needed to see you," she whispered. "I needed to understand what kind of man could kill my Thomas and ride away without looking back. I needed to know if you were a monster or just broken." The words hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Cole thought of all the meals Eleanor had cooked for him, all the quiet conversations on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. The way she'd listened to his stories without judgment, the way she'd thanked him for protecting her from dangers that existed only in her imagination. "And what did you decide?" Eleanor rose from the table with a fluid grace that marked all her movements, but her hands shook as she smoothed her skirts. "That's the problem, isn't it? You're not a monster, Cole McKenna. You're just a man who's been running so long he's forgotten what he's running from." She moved to the window that faced east, where the sun was climbing higher into a sky that promised another scorching day. Her reflection in the glass looked fragile as spun sugar, ready to shatter at the first hard wind. "Thomas was loading supplies into the wagon when you came into Millerville," she continued, her voice distant as if she were recounting a dream. "He'd won money at cards the night before, enough to buy seed for spring planting. He was so proud, so happy. He kept saying we were finally going to make it through." Cole closed his eyes, but he could still see Thomas Harwick's face in his memory. A man in his 30s with gentle eyes and work-calloused hands, wearing a clean shirt and a hopeful smile. A man who'd called Cole a cheat when the cards didn't fall his way, who'd gone for his gun with the clumsy desperation of someone who'd never drawn on another human being. He wasn't fast enough, Cole said quietly. No. Eleanor's voice broke on the word. He wasn't. But he tried. He died trying to defend his honor, trying to make sure his wife wouldn't think him a coward. The silence that followed was heavy as a gravestone, filled with all the words that couldn't be spoken and all the pain that couldn't be healed. Cole opened his eyes and found Eleanor watching him in the window's reflection, her face a map of sorrow and something that might have been forgiveness. The bounty hunters are coming, she said finally. I sent word to them yesterday morning. They should be here by noon. Cole nodded, surprised by his own calm. He'd been expecting death for so long that its arrival felt almost like relief. How many? 4, maybe 5. Men like you, fast with their guns and empty where their souls should be. And you? Eleanor turned from the window to face him, and Cole saw that she was holding a small derringer, its silver surface catching the morning light like a fallen star. Her hand was steady, but tears still traced their paths down her cheeks. I wanted to do it myself, she whispered. I wanted to be the one to send you to whatever hell is waiting for men like you. But I can't. God help me, I can't. The derringer clattered to the floor as Eleanor's composure finally shattered. She sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from some deep well of grief that had never been properly emptied. Cole found himself moving toward her without conscious thought, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. He knelt beside her chair and gently touched her shoulder, feeling her flinch beneath his fingers like a wounded bird. Eleanor. She looked up at him through her tears, and Cole saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten with an emotion he'd thought long dead. Not hatred or rage or the cold satisfaction of revenge, but something infinitely more dangerous. Understanding. I know what you are, she whispered. I know what you've done. But these past weeks, watching you, talking with you, seeing the way you move through the world like you're carrying the weight of every sin you've ever committed. I know you're not evil, Cole. You're just lost. The sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley like thunder before a storm, growing louder with each passing second. Cole rose to his feet and moved to the window, counting the dust clouds that marked the approaching riders. 5 men, all armed, all coming to collect the bounty on his head. He turned back to Eleanor, who had wiped away her tears and was watching him with something that looked almost like hope. There's still time, she said. You could run. Take your horse and ride north toward the mountains. They'd never catch you. Cole smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. No, ma'am. I'm done running. As the thunder of hoofbeats grew closer, Cole reached for his guns, and Eleanor rose to stand beside him, both of them facing the window and whatever judgment was riding toward them across the desert floor. The widow and the gunslinger stood back to back against 5 killers, and discovered that redemption sometimes was the face of the very enemy who should have destroyed you. The sun reached its zenith like a burning eye in a cloudless sky, casting everything in stark relief. The approaching riders, the weathered cabin, and the 2 unlikely figures standing side by side in the doorway. Cole McKenna checked his guns one final time, the familiar weight of steel and powder a comfort against the trembling in his hands that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the woman beside him. Eleanor had retrieved a Winchester from above the fireplace mantel, the rifle looking almost too large for her slender frame. But her hands were steady as she worked the lever, chambering around with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd grown up on the frontier where survival meant knowing which end of a gun to point at trouble. You don't have to do this, Cole said quietly, his eyes never leaving the 5 riders who had spread out in a rough line across the valley floor. This isn't your fight anymore. Eleanor's laugh was dry as desert wind. Isn't it? I brought them here, Cole McKenna. I painted that target on your back with my own hand. If you're going to die today, I'll die knowing I stood with you at the end instead of hiding behind my grief like a coward. The bounty hunters came to a halt 50 yards from the cabin, their horses stamping and snorting in the heat. Cole recognized the type immediately, Hard men with empty eyes and guns worn smooth by constant use. Men who killed for money because killing was the only trade they'd ever learned. The leader sat his horse like he owned the world, a big man with silver hair and a star-shaped scar across his left cheek. He wore his guns low and loose, the mark of someone who'd never met a situation he couldn't shoot his way out of. Cole McKenna, the man called out, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. I'm Marcus Kane. You might have heard of me. Cole had. Kane was legend in certain circles, a bounty hunter who'd never failed to bring in his quarry and had never brought anyone back alive. The kind of man who slept well at night because he convinced himself that dead men couldn't argue with justice. I've heard, Cole replied, stepping out onto the porch. Heard you shoot men in the back and call it fair play. Kane's smile was cold as winter moonlight. Fair's got nothing to do with it, McKenna. You got a price on your head, and I'm here to collect it. Question is, you gonna make this easy or hard? Hard, Cole said without hesitation. Always been partial to hard. The silence that followed stretched taut as a bowstring, filled with the weight of impending violence and the electric tension that comes just before thunder breaks. Cole felt Eleanor move up beside him, the Winchester held ready in her capable hands. Mrs. Harwick, Kane called out, his tone shifting to something that might have passed for sympathy if it hadn't been wrapped around a core of ice. You don't belong in this. Walk away now, and nobody's going to hold it against you. Eleanor's response was to raise the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel at Kane's chest. This is my land, my home, and you're not welcome here. Kane's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. Have it your way, lady. But when the smoke clears, you'll be just as dead as the killer you're protecting. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, maybe two. Then one of Kane's men, a thin, nervous-looking gunfighter with twitchy hands, made the mistake of reaching for his gun. Cole drew and fired in one fluid motion, the Colt bucking in his hand like a living thing. The nervous gunfighter toppled from his saddle, a red stain spreading across his shirt front as he hit the ground and didn't move. The valley erupted in gunfire. Eleanor's Winchester boomed like thunder, and another bounty hunter screamed as the heavy slug tore through his shoulder, spinning him sideways in his saddle. Cole rolled behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood of the porch, drawing his second gun and returning fire with the calm precision of a man who'd done this dance too many times to count. Kane and his remaining men scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and scrub brush, their horses bolting in panic as lead filled the air like angry hornets. Cole heard Eleanor work the lever of her rifle, chambering another round, and felt a fierce pride in her courage that surprised him with its intensity. A bullet whined past his ear, close enough to part his hair, and Cole spotted the muzzle flash from behind a boulder 30 yards to his left. He put 2 shots into the rock, chipping stone and forcing the hidden gunman to duck for cover. Eleanor, he shouted, the one behind the big rock on the left. Her rifle spoke again, the bullet striking sparks from the boulder's surface. A man cursed viciously from behind the stone, and Cole heard the sound of boots scrambling for better cover. The gunfight lasted maybe 3 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the smoke finally cleared, 3 men lay still in the dust, their blood slowly soaking into the hard-packed earth. The wounded bounty hunter had managed to mount his horse and was riding hard for the horizon, clutching his shattered shoulder and leaving a trail of crimson drops behind him. Kane stood alone in the middle of the valley, his guns empty and his face a mask of rage and disbelief. A thin line of blood trickled from a graze across his forehead where one of Cole's bullets had come close enough to kiss him with death. It's over, Kane, Cole called out, stepping from behind the water trough with both guns trained on the bounty hunter's chest. Ride away, and we'll call it even. Kane's laughter was harsh as breaking glass. Even? You killed 3 good men today, McKenna. Men with families. Men who deserved better than dying in this godforsaken valley for the likes of you. They came here to kill me, Cole replied quietly. I just happened to be better at it. For a moment, Kane looked like he might go for the spare gun Cole could see tucked into his belt. But something in Cole's eyes, Some glimpse of the darkness that lived behind the gunslinger's calm facade made him think better of it. "This ain't over," Kane said, backing toward his horse. "There'll be others. There's always others." "Maybe," Cole agreed. "But not today." Kane mounted his horse and rode away without looking back, leaving nothing behind but dust and the memory of violence. Cole watched him go, then turned to find Eleanor standing in the cabin doorway, the Winchester still clutched in her hands and her face pale as morning frost. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole holstered his guns and walked to where she stood, gently taking the rifle from her trembling fingers. For now, they spent the rest of the day burying the dead under the blazing desert sun, marking each grave with a simple wooden cross that would weather away to nothing in a few short years. It was hard work, made harder by the weight of what they'd shared and the knowledge that everything between them had changed in the space of a few violent minutes. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, they sat together on the porch just as they had for weeks before. But now the silence between them was different. Not the careful distance of strangers learning to trust, but the comfortable quiet of two people who'd faced death together and emerged transformed. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Cole stared out at the valley where they'd fought and bled and somehow found a way to survive. "I don't know. Never made it this far before." "You could stay," she said quietly, not looking at him. "The land needs working. The house needs repairs. And I need someone who understands that redemption isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing who you want to be in spite of it." Cole turned to study her profile in the dying light, seeing not the desperate widow who'd hired him to die, but a woman who'd found the courage to stand with her husband's killer against the darkness that threatened to swallow them both. "I killed Thomas," he said, the words heavy as stones in his mouth. "I know." Eleanor finally looked at him, and Cole saw tears glittering in her dark eyes. "But you also stood with me today when you could have Ron. You chose to fight for something besides money and reputation. That has to count for something." The night sounds were beginning. Crickets and coyotes, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the sage. Peaceful sounds. Sounds that spoke of home and belonging and the possibility of a future that didn't end with violence in some nameless town. "The bounty's still on my head," Cole said. Kane wasn't lying about that. "There'll be others." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then we'll face them together. And if we're lucky, maybe someday there won't be anyone left who remembers Cole McKenna, the gunslinger. Maybe there'll only be Cole McKenna, the rancher, who helped a widow rebuild her life and learn to live with his ghosts." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Cole McKenna made a choice that surprised him more than any he'd ever made. He reached out and took Eleanor Harwick's hand, feeling her fingers intertwine with his like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their proper place. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." The dust settled around them like a benediction, and for the first time in years, the silence held no threat of violence, only the promise of tomorrow and the hope that redemption might be possible for even the most broken of souls. In the distance, a coyote howled its ancient song to the stars, and two unlikely partners sat together on a porch in the middle of nowhere, learning that sometimes the greatest courage is found not in drawing your gun, but in choosing to lay it down.